Olá, boa tarde, bem-vindos e bem-vindas a mais uma mesa do nosso colóquio. Eu sou Vitor Bianconi Menini, sou doutorando em História pela Unicamp. Gostaria de saudar a todos. Vou ser bem breve no português aqui, depois a gente vai passar para o inglês. Gostaria de convidar a todos e todas a colocarem as suas questões que serão debatidas no final, então eu vou estar de olho no chat para isso. Então, nosso convidado hoje é o professor Eldar Heide, que é professor na Universidade Ocidental de Ciências Aplicadas da Noruega, professor de norueguês e pós-doutor no Centro de Estudos Medievais da Universidade de Bergen. So now, Professor Heide, I will present you in English and then you can start. So we have here with us this afternoon Professor Eldar Heide from the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, professor of Norwegian and postdoctor at the Center for Medieval Studies at the University of Bergen. So, Professor, thanks for having for being us with here today, and you can start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm joining you from Sweden this time. I live in Western Norway, but I'm a member of a club that owns a boat similar to the one that you see in the slide here. And we sailed from Western Norway to the Stockholm area this summer. And now we meet here in Sweden to take care of the boat. So, yeah, and my title, in Historia Norwegie, there's a passage about a magical fishing incident, and it's considered incomprehensible and corrupt. This passage. And what I will do is use folklore from modern times and try to make sense of it. The paper is a case study in retrospective methods. Some of you may know that I've spent quite a bit of time trying to use post-medieval folklore as a supplement in Old Norse studies, and this is an example of that. And yeah, so it's a case study, and I believe the case is good because the text does not make sense without comparison with 19th and 20th century folklore. It's considered not to make sense, but I believe that with the use of late legends, it makes good sense. Yeah, so a bit about retrospective methods first. You can say it's the use of later material to say something about ancient times. So it's reasoning backwards. It certainly is a demanding approach, and it's only exceptionally possible. And usually it can only be a supplement to other more reliable material. Still, I believe it's needed because we are chronically short of information. Even though the Old Norse medieval textual corpus is uniquely large for Western Europe, still we are chronically short of information. So the more pieces to the puzzle, the better, even if not all pieces are equally reliable. Using post-medieval material will usually work best in a hybrid approach, where we combine Old Norse texts, archaeological material, place names, etymology, post-medieval folklore, and so on. Then a bit more about Historia Norwegie. It's a short history of Norway written in Latin. It's very early. It's written probably in the period 1160 to 75. And it's preserved only in one manuscript from circa 1500. and it was found by P.A. Munch in Scotland in 1848. And the passage that I'm going to talk about is this one. As you can see, the editor has added a crux on each side of the passage, indicating that the text is corrupt in some way. This passage that I show here is edited from the edition by Lars Boye Mortensen, and the reasoning that led him to the conclusion that the passage is corrupt goes like this. The period, this is Mortensen's words, so the period entails a number of textual problems. Perhaps a whole clause is missing somewhere. The two main problems are: what is the point of the story? What is the correlate of quos? Not only is this an awkward story, but it's also very irregular to have blah blah. It's tempting to look for blah blah, but this would demand much textual surgery. However, the logic or punchline of the story does not become much clearer. It seems the better solution to provide the passage with a crux. Quos means which. And this passage follows the more famous and longer passage about Gandus, which was essential to my doctoral thesis. So we take a look at the previous passage in Historia Norwegie. It's about Gandus, which is a Latinization of Old Norse Gandr. And Gandr refers to helping spirits or a free soul sent forth by a ritual specialist in order to get information or attract resources, fight with other ritual specialists, etc. Gandr is connected to Seidr in Old Norse sources. It seems that Seidr was about sending forth such spirits that could be referred to as Gandar. Part of the problem of the passage I'm discussing today about magical fishing is how we are to understand the relationship between this previous passage and the magical fishing. As you can see here, the fishing passage starts with the word item, which means likewise or similarly. So apparently the author sees this passage as one more case of something he just told about. So one more passage about Gandus is what this item seems to indicate. However, it's not easy to see how this can be the case. We take a look at Mortensen's attempt at translation, which reads, again, when the Finns, that's the Sami, when the Finns, together with the Christians, had gone about catching by hook a flock of fish, such as these heathens had seen in Christian dwellings, they drew almost full traps out of the deeps with their wand, and so loaded the boats to capacity. So the passage tells about an encounter between the Sami and the Norwegians, and about how the Sami make use of some kind of supernatural fishing method. But it's hard to get the grasp of what really happens. One problem of the text is that it's uncertain what the Sami had seen in the Norwegian dwellings. Here, Mortensen has chosen a slight emendation, which implies that fish is what the Sami have seen in the Norwegian dwellings, and that the Sami later pulled this fish out of the deep into their boats. Alternatively, the Sami had seen fish nets in the Norwegians' houses, and later the Sami pulled these fish nets from the sea. But this requires a very irregular word order, Martinson remarks. In either case, there does not seem to be much point in the story, and it's hard to see a connection between what the Sami have seen in the Norwegian houses and what they pull up from the sea. So it doesn't make much sense. So why would the author want to waste precious parchment on this? I believe legends recorded in Iceland and Norway in the 19th and 20th centuries can throw light on this puzzle. I'll first show you a legend recorded by Jón Árnason in Iceland in the mid-19th century. It goes like this. In the parish of Halfdan the priest, there lived an old woman who was called Ólöf. She knew a great deal of magic, and she and Halfdan had many quarrels with one another. One autumn, Halfdan rowed out to the fishing with his men, and they caught a great flounder. At the time, the weather was very chilly, and the fishermen got cold. Then the priest said, as they were complaining about the cold, "What would you give me now, boys, if I were to haul in a hot black pudding for you to comfort yourselves with?" They said that he would not be able to do that, even if he wanted to. But a little later, the priest catches a steaming hot black pudding on his hook. Then everyone on board ate from it, and they all liked it. But in the meantime, the flounder disappeared out of the boat. Then Halfdan, the priest, says, "The old woman wants something in return." Halfdan got the black pudding from Ólöf by magical means. It said that what she did was using the word "seiða," so this word connected to magic. But then she took the flounder from him in the same way. A black pudding is a sausage containing blood, among other things. So a blood sausage is the Norwegian term for it. Then to northern Norway, where similar legends were recorded in the 1960s. A fisherman catches steaming hot black pudding on his line at sea, and it comes from his wife at home. So a difference is that it's his wife, and only his wife has supernatural skills, not the fisherman as well. The fisherman's wife sends the black pudding to demonstrate her power. And in these legends, the point seems to be a contradiction between, contradictions seems to be the point because there's so many contrasts. We can line up or list these contrasts. There's away from home as contrasted to home. There's cold, warmth, sea, land, supposed to catch wild live food by pulling it up, as opposed to receiving processed food by seemingly pulling it up really sideways. And then the basic opposition, nature and culture. The cold at sea is not explicit in the Norwegian versions, but the contrast emerges from the pointing out to how the black pudding is steaming hot. The dramatic point seems to be in these legends the contradiction between being at the cold, inhospitable sea and at the same time having direct access to home and its warmth and its cultural goods. So one might say that the essence is that the fishermen pull up from the sea cultural objects that come directly from home. If we return to Historia Norwegie, it seems that the confusing passage can be read as quite analogous to these legends. That is, if we follow Mortenson's reading that what the Sami pulled up from the deep is the fish that they had seen in the houses of the Norwegians. as highlighted here. So let's make a comparison. In the Historia Norwegie passage, there's the same contrast between away from home and home, and also sea, land, and nature culture pulling up, but really sideways, and possibly receiving processed food from home, as opposed to catching wild live food. So we find most of the contrasts in the Historia Norwegie passage. But the food that they pull up from the deep is not warm, and it does not seem to be processed. But it may be processed because cases in the Latin text may be read as sheds. And if the Sami have seen fish in the Norwegians as sheds, that would probably be stockfish, dried fish. So stockfish is a processed cultural product. This could also throw light on the somewhat confusing information that they are trying to catch a flock of fish that the Sami have seen in the houses. You don't see a flock of fish in a house, or a shoal of fish. It's used the flock word flock in the addition. So, but you don't see a shoal of fish in a house. However, Old Norse skreið is the standard term for stockfish in Old Norse, but its literal or etymological meaning is a shoal or a swarm or an avalanche, things like that. This mass approaching. So, which refers to the Arctic cod that migrates from the Barents Sea to the coast of northern Norway. Well, the shoal could be herring, which can also be dried, but the word herring doesn't mean a flock. And as far as I know, the large-scale herring fisheries came later because the herring is so fat that it's far better preserved with salt. And the large amount of salt did not become affordable until late. So here, skreið, it's a shoal or like an avalanche of fish coming from the Barents Sea to the shores. So that's the original meaning, but in Old Norse, it's a standard word for stockfish, dried cod. So yeah, we'll return to that later. Okay, then the contrast again. If stockfish, dried fish is what the Sami pulled up from the sea, this contradicts the sea equally well as does the steaming hot black pudding, just in another way. And that could be the point of the story. My suggestion about this Historia Norwegie passage is that the Sami have seen stockfish in the Norwegians as sheds. And then when the Norwegians and the Sami are fishing together, the Sami pull up from the sea nets full of stockfish that come from there. The unkos, hooked staff that the Sami used for this is an Old Norse kråkstavr, known from supernatural travel connected to Gandr. Unkos is what Mortensen translated as a wand, but it's a hooked staff. So literally the same as Old Norse kråkstavr, which is used in connection with magic writing in Old Norse and later Icelandic tradition. So, for example, here in the 13th century, Thorsteinsdatter Bøyar-Magns, the hero Thorstein, flies on a kråkstavr to the other world and refers to this as Gandreið. Gandr riding. And we find the same use of a krokstaver in 19th century Icelandic tradition. I should add, by the way, that in the sources for Sami and Old Norse ritual practices, it makes no difference if the spirit sent forth rides on or is inside the means of travel. So that's one of the results from my doctoral thesis. On this background, the hooked staff may connect Historia Norwegie's magical fishing passage to the ritual practices surrounding the Gandus in the previous passage. The hooked staff, in a way, clearly is thought to have some kind of extension all the way to the sheds ashore. And to judge from the rest of our material, this extension would be the hooked staff representing the means of travel that the spirit sent forth, uses on its journey to faraway places. So there's a possible connection to CEVE here. Gandus or Gandr is connected to CEVE. CEVE is often about attracting resources, sometimes fish. Item implies a repetition from the previous passage about Gandus, which is said to be used to attract resources. And in the Icelandic black pudding legend, the verb seida is used. None of this proves anything, of course, but there are several pieces of evidence pointing in the same direction. In any way, the essential interpretation put forward here does not depend upon the fishing magic being seidr. If we read the fishing passage in the way I suggest, it has a point equally good as the black pudding legends. The connection between what the Sami see in the houses and what they later pull up from the sea is explained. The connection to the previous passage becomes clear. Because then both passages tell about how the Sami are able to attract resources by sending forth spirits that use different shapes as means of travel. Then we should ask, could the black pudding legends derive from Historia Norwegie? If so, I cannot use them the way I do. Well, few things are impossible, but it seems very unlikely that they derive from Historia Norwegie because the Historia Norwegie passage does not make sense. We need the black pudding legends to decipher it. So how could they derive from the Historia Norwegie passage? And secondly, Historia Norwegie seems to have been very little known. The text was lost altogether for centuries until one manuscript was found in Scotland in 1848. Accordingly, the black pudding legend seems to stem from medieval oral traditions related to those that were written down in the Historia Norwegie passage. Here's my conclusion about the Historia Norwegie passage. I believe the passage is about magical fishing. Well, sorry. The passage does not make sense alone, but read on the background of 19th and 20th century Icelandic and Northern Norwegian legends, it seems to make good sense and fit in with other medieval information. These legends seem to be an example of how oral tradition can be quite stable from medieval times until modern times. When I discussed this with the editor Martinson some years ago, he changed his mind and no longer saw the passage as corrupt. So then I would like to add some considerations about retrospective methods. As you may know, there was, until the mid-20th century, there was extensive use of post-medieval popular traditions as a source, or even a major source, for Old Norse religion. So the field of folkloristics was an important contributor to the studies of Old Norse religion. This changed, starting with a thesis by Jan de Vries in 1931 about the late Odin tradition. So in the 1950s, no scholars anymore used post-medieval material. And the reaction against the use of this kind of material was very understandable, because certainly it was used in a naive way, an unsystematic way, and with not enough considerations about the problems attached to the approach. So not much of the studies from that period, early 20th century, based on folkloric material, not many of those studies are valid or of much value today. Some are, very many are not. So the reaction against those approaches was needed, I would say. But then it often, or even usually, happens that when there's a reaction, the pendulum swings too far in the other direction. So during the 1950s and 1960s, also the Old Norse prose sources were considered to be of little value for the study of Old Norse religion. Then that has changed. So from the late 1970s onwards, the prose sources were taken back in, and then even the legendary sagas, and then maybe from the 1990s, also some of the post-medieval material were starting to be used again. And now, during the latest 2 decades or so, there's been, I would say, quite a movement of people who try to use post-medieval material in different ways. Yeah, but still, many scholars reject the use of post-medieval material and believe that if you use it, you are necessarily a bad scholar, one with a naive and outdated view of sources and source criticism. I believe that view is outdated. So, but the question is, how can we make people accept the potential of retrospective methods? One could say that we should write theoretical articles and argue that in principle it should be possible, in theory it should be possible, but I don't think that's the best approach. Although that is also something that we should do, but I think it's better to demonstrate the potential in case studies whose results are widely accepted. So if everyone can see that the use of such material can lead to convincing results, then claims that it's impossible will have little effect. So so one could say that even if people are surprised that an approach works, that doesn't matter as long as it works, and it's widely accepted that it works. So because the results, if an approach can produce convincing results, that will change people's attitudes about or opinions about what approaches are valid or what approaches should be used or could be used. Okay, that was what I wanted to say. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Heide. So we will start debating some of the questions here. I'll start with a question of my own, and then we'll move forward to other questions. My first question is regarding the Gandus, so the Gandri that you spoke. It was not the center of the talk, but my question is, could you explain a little further for our viewers what can the Gandus be understood of? And I'm asking that because in the Historia Norwegie, the Gandus in the Latin version appears related with the shaman drum, or the vessel that is decorated with tiny animal figures or so. So if you could explain a little further that, it would be great.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very valuable source. It's a description of Sami shamanic seance. So there's a Sami Noidi, a shaman, beating a drum, which is described as similar to the Sami drums that we know from 17th century onwards, and he falls into a trance, and so his body is lying lifeless, and apparently his soul or some kind of soul leaves his body. But then suddenly his stomach is ripped up and he dies. And then the Norwegian witness who has told this to the author asks the other Sami what happened, and they say that, okay, well, while and it's Gandus is used about this soul moving around, so in a physical shape. So he was moving around in the shape of a whale or some big fish in a lake or a fjord. But then the Gandus of an enemy shaman, well, in a way, attacked him. So there were pointed pikes, posts on the bottom of the lake, and which ripped up the stomach of the whale or the shaman. So that way he died, and that's how we know this complex from the medieval sources and very widely in later sources as well. If some ritual specialist lies in a trance and sends forth his spirit in a physical shape, then what happens to this physical shape will also happen to the ritual specialist at home. So Gandus is the term used for the shaman's spirit sent forth in a physical shape.
Great, thank you. So now I do have some questions regarding the retrospective methodology that you presented, and I found it very compelling, your statement that it is possible and it's worth trying it in a non-theoretical way, applying it. So My first question is regarding Olaus Magnus' Historia om det nordiska folket, which you're familiar with. And if you think that Olaus Magnus could be a valid addition for information both on the stockfish markets that you talked about, but also on the magical implements and on the magical fishing as well. What's your opinion or take on using Olaus Magnus as some kind of post Historia Norwegie source for that kind of information?
So what does he say about such things?
Well, he does describe the stockfish markets there. He spends a whole book talking about how fishing is important for the coastal population, and he's probably one of the first, as my readings go, that describe the gandus as a point or an arrow or kind of a pike. So I was wondering if you could if you have some insights on that, if Olaus could be just as the Norwegian folk tales were used to piece some of those informations on this kind of magical fishing or this gandus relations with the Sami. Do you have an opinion on that? Is that enough? Or
well, thank you. It's I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that that information. So, but yeah, that's possible. So,
okay.
But usually, what one yeah, I usually in retrospective methods you need many pieces of information because each piece not be very reliable. So you need many pieces, and if they give the same picture independently, then you may be onto something. So so that I think would be my reply. If what he says fits in with other information, then the combined argument could be strong.
Okay. I do have a similar one. I should have added that first, but the Historia om Olaus Magnus, he talks a lot about the Sami as a wind wind controllers and being able to use the weather in a magical way. And so in the sense that you're talking, it would be possible to use those kind of information to try to piece together and find out if this controlling of the weather is also related to the magical fishing or some kind of passages. Is that possible? Would you say?
I would say absolutely, and I make in use of information from the same period in my doctoral thesis about wind magic. So again, I would say the important question is if it fits in with other information. So if you have many independent pieces of information, then that could build a convincing theory.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you. I do have one more question on this comparative power. I will ask for you. I will have to read the whole question, so I will try my best to make it understandable for you. Okay. So, is the comparative power between the legends of different cultures be a way to answer the elements of narratives, such as poems and sagas, which otherwise could not be answered at all? They're asking this question because they're citing a 2019 paper, The Wild Host and the Etymology of Sami Stalu of Norwegian Stole, which you explored elements of modern Scandinavian legends and customs that might not otherwise be understandable, such as, for example, the connections between the wild host and the mumming traditions, such as the Yule book. So I'm not sure if I made it completely understandable for you, but that's a bigger question. So,
could you repeat the first part?
Absolutely. Is there a comparative power between the legends of different cultures, a way to answer the elements of narratives such as poems and sagas? So they're asking if this...
There was a disturbance on the line, so I have to ask you to read it again.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I will try my best again. So wouldn't the comparative power between the legends of different cultures be a way to answer the elements of narratives such as poems and sagas, which otherwise could not be answered at all? So, and they're citing your paper, which you explore elements of modern Scandinavian legends and customs that might not otherwise be understandable, such as, for the example, the connection between the wild host and the mumming traditions, such as the Yule goat. So I'm reading this. I'm not familiar with this paper, but I think we're still talking about this retrospective methodology. And
yeah, I appreciate such questions, but I'm afraid I don't. I don't get it. I'm
okay,
sorry.
sure.
So if you could ask them to rephrase it, I could try.
Sure.
Vitor,
Pablo,
do you mind if I
Pablo is
step
the one
in?
that asked. So yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
I was the one who formulated the question. It was because at the end of your presentation, you were presenting us the elements of the retrospective methodology, and for me, this is curious because I read, of course, your 2019 paper on the wild host because my thesis was about the wild host, and I was thinking that if it wasn't by this approach, we wouldn't have much answer on this question. So for me, it is more like, or we use your methodology, not your methodology, but retrospective method, or we don't have an answer at all to these elements. It was more in this kind of perspective that I was asking this question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the fishing passage in Historia Norwegie is one example of that. It was considered corrupt. So without late folklore, no, it doesn't make sense. So certainly, and also this wild host, I believe, and it's this wild host tradition. It's so rich. You find it all over Northern Europe and maybe further south, and there's eastwards through Eurasia. So there's so much, and yeah, I'm actually have been writing on, I believe it's going to be a book about the late Odin tradition from southern Scandinavia and the German-speaking areas, and I believe it can really show throw light on the early phases of Odin and the community of Old Norse gods. So which wouldn't be possible in any other way. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very interesting. I do have another one, which is about Johannes Schäferus, which we talked about before the presentation, and also on retrospective methodology. When you describe Laponia and Schäferus, you ended up stating that it's an unreliable source for that kind of information because it's not a first-handed source. It's probably a description that came from priests and another context on 17th century Sweden. But Schäferus does describe a tyre, which is a round ball that he talks on as being gandus, if I'm not mistaken. So my question around that is why is the unreliability around the Schäferus because it's not a first-handed source, or it's because of the priest descriptions? In other words, do you think that the round ball description by Schäferus is not a piece that could be tied together in that puzzle, or because of his context, or is that another reason for that?
Well, Schäferus is in general, of course, the sources for Sami religion are very complicated because it's so difficult to know who are the primary sources and who just copied from this or that scholar. But Schäferus, I believe, we can be really thankful to Håkan Rydving at the University of Bergen for his work in sorting out the relationship between the different sources for time relation. But in the case of Schäferus, in the cases where he has information that we don't find elsewhere, of course, we should use that. But if it's possible, as Håkan Rydving has tried, if it's possible to find Schäferus' source and say that this other author was earlier, and then we should prefer that other author.
Okay.
So, but I'm not saying that Schäferus has no value, but
sure.
we should try to sort it out and find, in the cases where there's other sources, better sources, we should use them.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. We do have a question from the general public as well. It's a more general. I'm not an expert in the area, so I'm going to pass you the question. I'm not sure if you could answer that, but one of our viewers is asking about if runes or rune inscriptions appear in Historia Norwegie or around magical fishing as well. I'm not sure if you have any information on that, but that's the question.
So if there are any runes in Historia Norwegie or reference to runes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so, but I'm not an expert on Historia Norwegie. I've just studied again and again those two passages, and then the rest of it's a history of Norway and a description of Norway's geography. So, but I doubt it. I don't think there are any runes or reference to runes.
Sure. Very, very good. Thank you. I'm gonna check if we have any other questions here. I'm pretty sure we're. Oh, there we go. So there's another question from our viewers as well. They're asking for sources or literary sources to study the Norwegian folklore. What are some basic sources for that?
So, like an entrance to Norwegian folklore?
Yes.
Well, if you're interested in pre-Christian religion and early beliefs, it's the works of Niels Lid. Niels Lid, so Nilslid. He was a folklorist and active in from the 1920s to 1950s, I think.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So he collected and used also large amounts of Norwegian and Scandinavian, Northern European folklore. So that could be an entrance, but he's a bit dangerous because he builds he's a bit daring, building too much on uncertain etymologies. So, and he forces the material a bit too much. But then, if you have access to, that's of course a question what library access you have. But there's the series by Norsk Folkeminnelag. So Norsk Folkeminnelag has this series of like 100 books or more. That's the major collection of Norwegian.
Okay, I will send the link for the viewers later, and that they can try that. Thank you very much, Professor Heide. That is actually the last questions that we have. So on behalf of NEVI, I would like to thank you for your time and your presentation. It was very clarifying. I really enjoyed being here, and hope to see you in another opportunity. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me. So,
thank you.